Hello, welcome back. In this chapter, we're going to look at the Italian with a6 at the sidelines. So the variations that are not involving bishop e6 straight with or without rook e8, and not the 97, knight g6 plan, which is large enough to have been covered in a separate chapter. We talk about position arising after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6, d3, bishop c5, c3, d6, castle a6, a4, bishop a7, and rook e1. And castle h3 is a big chunk of this chapter, but also 8th move h6, knight b2, g5 is something I'd like to mention. After h6, knight b2, bishop e6, I mentioned that in the overview chapter actually. We take before, and most likely black castle sooner or later, leading to the same thing as castle first, and then bishop e6 after h6, which is a separate chapter. It's basically castle, knight h3, h6, knight b2, and now bishop e6. Bishop e6, fe b4. As you can see, kind of coming down to the same thing here. h6, knight d2, bishop e6. Takes b4, and now castle, the same position. Besides g5 and castle, obviously, there is also a move knight h7. Fabiano tried it against Duda in an online game, and Duda reacted very well. He went b4. g5 transposes to g5 before knight h7, as we will see. Fabi went queen f6. d4. Very natural. Grabbing space in the center, as black is neglecting his king's safety, I would say. And as black is postponing taking the king out of the center, it is only more tempting to open that center. Of course, you cannot take with ed4 because of e5, d, b5, and white is blasting the center open while the king is still there. Knight g5 is what Fabi played, and now b5. Very strong move by Duda. If knight e7, at least keeping the knight closer to the center, white can take knight g5, g, knight f3, g4, knight g5. Very brave. We give up the h file, or open it rather, but black is unable to use it, and the f7 pawn is hanging. Also, it's not really the end of the world on the h file. I mean, even in theory, if there was nothing to do, we could always go something like h3, g8, g3. But of course, first we grab on f7. So this knight e7, not very good. Knight takes g5 is very strong, brave and strong. Knight a5 is what Fabi did, but now the knight is forever bad on a5. I always hesitate with this knight a5 move. Knight is very poor on the edge of the board, not really contributing to the fight in the center and the king side. Bishop e2, solid move by Duda. Next, you want to play bishop a3, bishop b4, and black hasn't achieved all too much in the on the king side. Castle, bishop a3, rook e8, queen c2, good move. Also, bishop b4 right away was good. Bishop b6, take c4. But things worked out well for Fabi. He played for Duda. He played queen c2 first, knight f3, bishop g4, and now bishop b4, bishop b6, take, and c4. The knight is a big problem. And after c5, only move as c5 was coming. Just a simple retreat. Knight a5 is totally out of play, and that is black's problem. Add to that the fact that the bishop is also staring at its own pawn. Not a good system, this knight h7 thing, and it was unfortunate for Fabi that Duda in Blitz game reacted so well. I suspect he was just improvising, but he did so very very well. Knight g5 is a big thing. This system with h6 g5 has been played at some point by some great players like Wesley So. Magnus Carlsen himself, in fact, played it mostly back when this was a surprise weapon. I think as the surprise value has been gone and players started checking this out more carefully, white has found the ways to counter this interesting setup. We start with b4. Now g4 is too premature. We go knight h4. Knight e4. This is a typical trick, knight e4, queen h4, but it's not good here. The king is very weak in the center. We go d4, open the center. f5, simply knight g3, and yeah, the king is not in a good shape. So this grabbing this pawn is a disaster for black. Instead, he should prepare g4 with knight h7 or knight h5. Both have been tried. Fabiano and Wesley played knight h7. Knight h5 has been played by Carlsen once. Again, I would take that with a grain of salt. The players played it back when this was relatively new, and they were hoping for a surprise value. Here, very strong is g3. It's a novelty, but the computers are already showing it. The ideas are, first of all, stopping knight f4, but also mainly protecting from the threat of g4. So now we have knight h4. If black tries bishop g4 instead, we don't care about the pin. d4, edcd knight d4, black accepts it, we go rook a3. And knight is well guarded, and castle bishop b2. Black had to castle, he couldn't use any his far advanced pawns for any initiative whatsoever. And now the situation changes dramatically. This h6, g5 pawns are just weaknesses. We have sacrificed the pawn. We don't mind that at all. We're happy to have given it up. We are going to create some dangerous play here along the long diagonal. Bishop g4, d4, not a problem. g4, knight h4 is also safe for white. Queen f6, rook f1, protecting the f2 pawn. Knight f4, black is trying to bring his pieces forward, scare us, but we don't care. King h1, knight h3, queen e2. f2 is not hanging. There will be issue down the f file. And if knight e7, we go f3, queen g7. Black is protecting from direct threats. fg, there is bishop g4, but it's clear that this knight on h3 hasn't led very far in terms of play on the king side. We play just queen g2, castle, and now knight f5. Strong pawn sacrifice, knight f5, e5, bishop f5, knight e4. We are unleashing our pieces, opening this bishop. The knight isn't doing much, and fg is a threat with all sorts of issues for black. After bishop e4, we just go d e4, and next we want to, at some point, take on g4, and we will have full control over the light squares, and the extra pawn that black has is not felt at all. And in fact, our king is much safer than the black's counterpart. This for knight h5, the move g3, very important, I believe. Knight h7 is also possible. Here we play king h1. A very strong move. Very, very strong move, giving that g1 square for the knight in case of g4. Also possible is rook f1, similar ideas, now giving the e1 square for the knight. But I think king h1 is preferable. If black goes g4, we play knight g1. If black now takes the pawn, we play rook f1. Taking the pawn is very dangerous as it opens the f-file. Black hasn't castled yet. Queen h4, we have a simple trick, knight f3. Either of the knights works, gf, knight f3. And the f2 bishop is falling. We regain the pawn and have an overwhelming positional advantage due to a much safer king. And if h5 here, b5, knight a5, bishop a2, h4, black is trying to still create something, but there's nothing. We got d4. Always important, if the king is stuck too long in the center, to at the right moment open the position with d4. And note how we first deferred the knight from the center and then opened it. So that works very well here. If bishop f2 right away, then move 11, we have rook f1. Bishop e3, we have bishop f7, king f7, knight e5. The tactics work. For example, king g7, rook f7, king g8, queen b3, and black's in trouble. After d5, a very nice finishing combination, rook d7. A little interference there, bishop d7, we have queen d5, and it's a checkmate. So bishop f2 too dangerous, with or without g4. And if 11 castle, probably best. We simply play rook f1, guarding the f2 pawn. And black hasn't achieved very much. He hasn't been able to create any kingside play, but rather weakened his kingside. Knight f6 is best, bringing the knight back. Play bishop b3, rerouting the knight from d2 to e3 via c4. Knight e7. You can play d4 here, grab the center, knight g6, and bishop b2. And black hasn't achieved very much here with h6, g5. Next we play c4, and I believe this is more of a weakness than really an offensive setup. And although the position is still complex, I don't think black's happy with the result and the outcome of the opening. But the move king h1 as well as rook f1, both moves aren't so easy, and we have to know them definitely. And even here after castle, rook f1, another strong move, something to be aware of for sure. That's for h6, g5. Now let's go for 8 castle, h3, and let's look at the alternatives here. There are really many. Let's cover them one by one. King h8 with idea knight g8 in f5 is very appealing. It's been introduced by to the high level by Levon and Levon Aronian. Levon likes this kind of ideas. He has a soft spot for this king h8, knight g8 5 idea. He's played it in various positions in the Italian or the Spanish. I think it's his childhood affection to Janisch gambit. The Janisch is this variation against the Spanish, and he feels the allure of that. But we will strike in the center. We can do so right away. Knight g8 now is met by b4. f5 is not so great anymore. White has a lot of play in the center. Bishop g5 first, knight f6, ef5, bishop f5, and now b5. Knight e7, knight bd2. We are engaging with the center, and the square is weak. After ed, knight d4, bishop d4, cd, yeah, the c6 square is weak. The e-file is open. Black hasn't achieved much. There's not much play on the f-file. AB, rook a1, queen a1. White is just slightly better here, to be honest. Bishop pair and good pieces here. So knight g8, f5, not really working. So black has to switch plans. Ed, cd, knight b4, grabbing the pawn. This is what Wesley tried. Very unappealing, to be honest. Fabi played a5, and well, Wesley was already struggling. As the knight on b4 is unstable, he was struggling with employment of his pieces. A knight on b4 is shaky, knight on g8 is also misplaced, so it was not clear what to do. He played f6, which is not a good sign. Knight c3, knight e7, knight e2, strong move by Fabi, sending the knight to f4, at d5, and after ed, knight d5, bishop a3. There are far too many pins on the knights. Rook e8, queen b3. There's a lot of pressure on the black pieces. Fabi played knight g3, but queen b3 is better. c6, knight c3, and black is sort of collapsing in the center here, as there is a lot of pressure on the knights, and he will have to lose the pawn eventually, and well, end up with a worse position here. So yeah, this is quite unfortunate. Knight g8, therefore not the best. They tried h6, interesting idea. Intending knight h7 maybe, but also maybe g5, g4 perhaps. And here bishop e3 is good. And now black has in fact three options. Ed, cd, d5 is sensible, but then the question is why king is on h8. After ed, knight d5, we just take bishop d5, queen d5, knight c3. We play in the center, queen d6, d5. Actually d5 is possible, but a5 first is more accurate. If bishop f5, we play d5, and bishop e3, there is intermezzo with d takes c6. So knight b4, bishop a7, rook a7, knight e5. Sorry, rook e5. Very strong move, and of course not knight e5 because of also knight c2 there. So rook e5, and king on h8 and rook on a7 are not well placed. Bishop c2, queen e2, rook a8, rook c1, king the bishop back, bishop g6, and now rook d1. Controlling all the squares along the d file, intending rook d4, and we have this tremendous central control. The rook on e5 is very strong. We control the e file, and black doesn't have a way to release the tension somehow, even though his pawn structure is fine. Yeah, he's quite cramped here. Likewise, 16 knight b4 doesn't solve all the problems. We play queen d2, intending bishop f4, bishop f5, bishop f4, queen d7, now knight e4. Bringing the knight closer to the king side, knight d5. Now it's time. Bishop takes h6, gh6, queen h6, bishop h7, and knight e5. And we don't win immediately as black has queen e6, but we prepare the second wave, queen h4. So we know second waves can also be very dangerous. And after queen f5, g4, rook g8, pinning the g pawn. We have a very strong tactic, knight g5, rook g5, queen g5, and queen g5, knight f7. Double attack, and we have gained a lot of pawns in the process, and we are already up material. And if black doesn't take on g5 and moves the queen, we have rook a3 swinging over. So our attack definitely succeeding here, but important once again to sometimes be able to see that in order for attack to succeed, sometimes, I mean, it's great if you can go forward and it's checkmate by force, but sometimes there is no mate. Like here, I imagine it would be quite hard for an unprepared player to find the right sequence, because you're looking at moves forward, but they don't really lead to immediate success, as black can defend his h7 bishop always. But it's important to sometimes also consider this move backwards, queen h4, just taking a move back. But now knight g5 is a threat, and there will come a second wave, and it is important to understand that sometimes in order for attack to succeed, you have to take one step back to continue going forward. But basically, EDCD d5, it would make sense, but now that the king is on h8, yeah, it's just incoherent what black has done. G5 possible, very risky. Knight bd2, g4, de5. Everything works here for us. Nice intermezzo, bishop e3, rook e3, de5, h4, knight g4, rook d3, moving the rook with the tempo, hitting the queen, queen f6, and now knight f1. We are protecting our king very well with our pieces. We have gotten rid of the bishop. I have mentioned also in the overview chapter of the A6 Italian, I've mentioned that when black goes for g5, g4, it's always nice to get rid of that strong a7 bishop. The bishop being there, the f2 pawn would be in trouble, but now without the bishop, we're feeling pretty safe. We want to play queen d2 next. We're not really worried. And also note that this opening the g-file is double-edged. Black also weakened his king tremendously. He's in the corner and doesn't have the g-pawn and only one weak h-pawn in front of it. So it's a question which king is safer here. Knight takes e4, move 11 is a very interesting move. Now there are two options. The computers are in favor of d5, but it does involve some consequences that are not entirely clear to me. After bishop e3, rook e3, we do win a piece, but after knight f2, very strong, king f2, knight e7. Black has 2 pawns and very easy play with f5, pushing some pawns forward. Also c6, fighting for the center. I believe it could be easy for black to play, though having looked at it with the computer, it's also not so easy. And white is a piece up, so after bishop f1, followed by c4, knight c3, it's actually not so easy for black to push, because if he pushes e4, it's hard to push f4. If he pushes f4, it's hard to push e4. It's hard to push both. Maybe it's more of an optical illusion rather than real compensation. Computer gives white an advantage, but I give you also a safer option of d takes e5 just in case. Knight e5. Sometimes you might play someone against whom you want to keep it more safe, or you maybe, depending on the time control, perhaps if it's a blitz game, you don't feel like defending, you might go for d e5. In any case, I give you both options. I think it's your choice. If knight e5, taking everything doesn't win material, though it looks like it does. There is very strong intermezzo knight d6. Knight gets out of the rook e4 threat and hits the bishop on c4, while bishop on a7 is still hanging. This is equalizing, also not more than equalizing for black. Of course, we can retreat this bishop and then take the e5 pawn, but this is just equal. Instead, I propose a third bishop a7, knight c4, rook e4, d5. Black is in time. He protects the knight, hits the rook, and a7 bishop is still hanging. And now rook h4, a very, very cool idea. Rook a7, queen d4, hitting both a7 rook and the h6 pawn. Black has a strong reply in c5, distracting us from the long diagonal. Cannot take on h6 now, as the king just moves. The rook will be hanging. But now we take on c5, b6, come back, and we have created an isolated pawn, against which I believe it's very easy to play. We want to trade the active knight and then install a piece on d4. For example, king g8. You have to move out. Knight bd2. Knight b2, we have rook b1. So eventually we will win back the b6 pawn and have a more harmonious position. Rook c7 is there, and then we go b3, move 20. Knight takes d2, queen takes d2. And so we will bring the rook back likely into the game across the fourth rank. And we have a slightly better position, at least optically. I like it. I think black has a bad bishop, the color of the isolated pawn. We can eventually also plant a knight on d4. I see some potential for good knight against bad bishop. So I believe the simple move 12 d5 gives white a small plus. But as I said, 12 d5 could very well be the objectively the strongest way to go. This for king h8. All in all, not too impressive. b5 is there, as I mentioned in the overview chapter. we cannot take because of rook a1, bishop c6, rook b1 in the end. So taking on b5 doesn't really work. And here instead we should choose bishop b3 or bishop a2. I've spent quite some time here looking at the nuances. And there are some ups and downs for both moves. Now, I recommend bishop a2, and the reason is the main idea behind bishop a2 is that after bishop b3, b4, d4, rook b8, bishop e3. Here, black would have bc, bc, knight e4, d5, bishop e3, rook e3, and there would be knight c5 hitting the bishop. And for this d4, bishop e3 to work, we need the bishop on a2, and that's why I recommend bishop a2. So now after b4, we go d4, bc, bc, and if rook b8, we have bishop e3. Knight e4, there's d5, winning a full piece. ed, cd, knight b4, a more accurate way to play. You don't want to lose the piece right away, so knight b4 is better. But now we play knight c3, knight e2, rook a2. We'll see these positions a lot in other chapters, in a5 chapters, for example. We have given up our bishop pair, but it seems that in most cases, this pawn center is worth more than the bishop pair. And one reason is that we can always trade the bishops. In theory, black's bishop pair advantage is relative. Basically, he just has a light squared bishop over our knight. The bishops neutralize each other. And yeah, as long as our center is well guarded, we don't really need it would be nice to have the bishop, but it's also okay without. We're also okay without it. So we'll see more of such positions in the a5 chapter, but this is comfortable for white. Rook e8, bishop e3, 13, h6, and knight b2. We have a very harmonious position. It happened in Karek in Aronian 2019, and why was better there? We have a center, pawn center, are well mobilized, developed. Nothing to be concerned about. Just small edge. More accurate is 10 h6. Now I propose knight b2, and here b4. So now we don't have the d4 push because knight is on d2. So this is more accurate. Knight f1, knight c4 is also possible, but I recommend knight f1, bishop e6, and now just take bishop e6, f e6, and bishop e3. We trade the bishops, bishop e3, rook e3, let's say rook b8, or bc, bc first, the same thing. Now I propose d4. Don't have to. You can also play knight 1, d2 first. Let's go d4, bc, bc. And now we get a position which is very slightly better for white. It's nothing special. It's reminiscent of the bishop e6 fe chapter. I constantly refer to other chapters. Ideally, I hope when you are studying this course that you go through all of the course in some order or the other. And then as you have full overview of the course, it becomes easier for you to understand these positions, because although the chapters are different, this type of position occurs throughout the course. So like finally, I think once you see everything, you'll have a better picture. But basically such positions, I believe, are slightly better for white. Even if black undoubles his pawns, he will have a slightly weak backward e6 pawn. There will be pressure along the c file. And the knight on f1 can either go to g3 towards the king side or to c4 towards the queen side, where it applies pressure on c4, guards the b2 square. Black can't make a huge use of the b file. Can bring the rook to b2. We can smoke it out with the trade of sorts. So not a big or even knight d2, knight c4, simply kicking the rook away. So I believe just a slightly better position for white. Nothing major, but b5, b4 is actually a decent system, especially with h6 first. I believe if your opponent is less well prepared, he is likely to push b4 here, and then d4 I think is really nice. That's for knight b5. Knight bishop e6. Okay, you can trade it bishop also right away. I look at h6, knight e2, bishop e6 in a separate chapter. Bishop e6 right away is different. Now, if you play knight bd2, then black can do without the move h6. He can play knight h5, knight f4, queen f6, and be a move faster, and that makes some impact. So instead, I propose to use the advantage of not having played knight d2 and play bishop e3 in one go. Now, note how it makes sense to trade bishops now as compared to doing it, let's say, here. Because after bishop e3, trade, the d2 square is pretty good for the knight anyway, but we would have had this dance knight bd2 to f1 and to d2 back. That would just cost us a lot of time. Instead, here we trade bishops first and then bring the knight in one go to d2, where it's quite well placed. So that's why bishop e3 here makes a ton of sense. Knight h5 first has been played by Grishuk. And I also played faces against Zhigalko. Bishop a7. Rook a7. Note that if bishop e3, rook e3, knight h5 would be a blunder because of knight takes e5. Knight e5 and then queen h5. But knight h5 first is possible because if knight e5, there is knight d3 in the end. So do realize there is that tactic to be aware of. Bishop a7, rook a7, g3 is what I recommend, stopping knight f4. Let's say a5. Black wants to prevent expansion with b4, makes a lot of sense. But now we can play for d4 in the long run. So knight b2, I propose queen e8, queen b3. Queen is well placed here. h6 example line really. Rook e3, rook is also doing very well. We want to include the other rook into the game. Place it here, e1, d1 or f1 somewhere. It's useful everywhere pretty much. And the rook on e3 is just reinforcing the knight and just simply very well positioned. Knight f6 back, let's say. Knight doesn't do much on h5 once the pawn is on g3. Knight f6 back. King g2 always useful, especially as the knight. Let's say if the queen was on g6, we could play king h2 instead, not to allow any knight f4 checks. So in this particular instance, well, knight f4, king h2 is there, but you don't want to be in the way of knight f4 check. But once the knight is back, you can definitely play king g2 very comfortably. Queen f7, let's say rook f1. Yeah, rook is also useful on c1, d1 or e1 as I mentioned, but on f1 it protects the f2 pawn once more, which is nice since black doubled here. And if knight d7, let's say we play a d4. Now that we have positioned our pieces ideally, we go d4. We have a bit more space in the center. As always, if black undoubles his pawns, the e6 pawn is a bit soft, the c file is there to be used. And if he doesn't, it's just harder for him to make these neutral moves. We have more space, it's easier for us to stand on one spot, and slowly but surely our small advantage may make a difference here. And that is for knight h5. Bishop e3 is similar, rook e3, especially so knight h5, knight e5 is there, it just doesn't work. 12 a5, we can play d4 first. Knight b2, queen b3 first is also very valid. Nothing wrong with that. d4 first is also possible. I like to show one more idea here. If knight d7, knight a3, an extra idea, bringing the knight to b5 instead of d2. Well, it has definitely something going for it, as we constantly apply pressure on the c7 pawn and make it harder for black to move. Let's say queen f6, knight b5, rook ac8. The rook is not thrilled to be merely a defender of a c7 pawn. Queen e2, let's say. Queen can also go to b3, as always. Queen e2 is also good. Rook f7, rook d1. And here lots of arrows I've drawn. Basically, we don't have to rush. We don't have any clear major threat. We want to slowly improve our position with b3, rook d2 perhaps. These are very small, minute improvements. g3, king g2 as well. Maybe knight h2, knight g4 one day. But mostly, all these waiting moves, they are easier for us. It should cost us also less time on the clock. And while for black, it's hard to find useful moves. So I believe this is just, practically speaking, and also objectively, a better position for white. d5, move 12 is interesting. It has never been played here. It has been played in the same position where black had a pawn on a5. That came in the variation with, we never actually come across that line in the course, but it can appear here, let's say. Excuse me. In a position like that. And with a6, excuse me, here. Yeah, the situation is a little bit different. We play knight b2, d4 and rook e1. So d5 is new here, but the idea is not new. So let's look at that. Black now can win the pawn, but that's temporary. We play queen b3, and black is going to lose either the b7 or the e6 or the e5 pawn. In fact, if rook a b8, let's say queen d6 first. Now there's a very nice idea here. Queen b7 would lose the queen, obviously, queen is getting trapped. But there's a very clever idea. Knight c4, hitting the queen, queen c5, and now knight b2. A very nice rerouting. The knight on b2 is rarely well placed, but here it is. If queen d6 back, we have this rook d1 move, so the knight is not in the way of the open file. Excuse me, I wanted to draw the arrow there. So very rare case of knight fianchetto being a great idea, but yeah, just as a concrete game. So queen e6 doesn't solve the problems. Rook a b8 also gives up the e6 pawn, queen e6, king h8, and now rook e3, queen d6, queen a2. We have a slightly better position. The knight on c6 is still dominated by the c3 pawn. The e5 pawn, although no longer doubled, is still weak. And yeah, small advantage is there for white. This for knight bishop e6, definitely solid as you had seen, but not too exciting for black. Rook e8, knight d2, bishop e6 without h6 is not very common. Take. Before we play the same way. If h6 we transpose, so the big chapter with the rook e8, bishop e6 setup. There's the extra option of d5, queen c2, d4. I should mention that rook e8 surprisingly doesn't have many downsides, as bishop g5 is not great here. And yeah, there's no other way really to exploit. Knight g5 is also not really thrilling, as black can just protect the f7 pawn. So yeah, we just play the same way. Knight d2, bishop e6, take before, and here, yeah, black usually goes h6. d5 is also possible, queen c2, d4. If not d4, let's say h6, we have a knight b3, and we go for that c5 square with bishop e3 next. This is a very nice instructive position, and there's been a very classy game, Nepo Mamedjarov, that I should remember to include in the model games section. A very good game. White traded the bishops, and then the knight, knight heading towards c5 was an issue for black. In fact, very instructive, as to a naive eye it might seem as though black has solved all his problems. And back in the day, when we were not so experienced with the Italian, we thought it was still 2016. Not everybody was aware that such positions can backfire for black, but Nepo proved white's advantage very convincingly. 13 d4 is another option, bishop b2. This happened in the game Kacharava derived by Lee. White was slightly better after takes, h6, for example, b5, knight d4, bishop d4, bishop d4, queen d4, knight d4, queen d4, sorry, knight f3. We get another position that is typical for the bishop e6, rook e6 positions. Lots of pieces are traded. Okay, let's make one more move, queen d7 back and rook ab1. Lots of pieces are traded. Remarkably, the pawn structure is actually the reverse Nairov. Surprisingly, if you think about it, it's like the d6 pawn, e5 pawn reversed. And just like in the Nairov, it is about the control of the d4 square, and black does not have that control. If his knight was somewhere around that, he would be fine, but the knight on f6 is actually very poor. Knight on f3 controls the d4 square, hits the e5 pawn. We already have some play here on the queen side, and at any moment we can prepare the d4 push, gaining more space in the center. And I have to say, it was a while ago that I realized that this is a reverse Nairov, and I found it a very interesting revelation. So that's the Nairov course plug back to move 9. We had looked already at king h8, b5, bishop e6, and rook e8. Time to move on to move 9, h6, main move, knight bd2, and now we covered rook e8, bishop e6, and knight e7, each in a separate chapter. Knight e7 was also covered together with knight e7. And here, let's cover all the remaining moves. They are a little bit smaller, so I sort of bundled them together. King h8 here doesn't make much sense. Black is not in time with knight, moving knight here or here and f5, because we just bring knight f1, knight g7, knight g3. We just brought a knight across to g3, and f5 means giving up this bishop, which is far too important for black in these positions. And at the end, also after we take everything, we'll have d4, and we'll block that bishop as well. And f5 leads really nowhere. There's very little point in going f5. When you cannot use the pressure along the f-file, because after d4 the bishop will be locked out on a7. King h8 just too late, one move too late. 10 queen e7 is very rare. It's not so bad, but it's similar to rook e8, bishop e6. It's just not better. So let's say before bishop e6, bishop b3 is slightly more cunning than taking on e6, and now if take, let's say queen e6, black is trying to somehow make use of queen on e7. If black insists, by the way, on not taking, we might hide the bishop on c2, as we will see in similar positions. We will see that in the rook e8, queen e7 line that's been played by Mamedyarov. But yeah, here, let's say take, let's say queen e6 fe, and this is very interesting. We have seen the positions in bishop e6 chapter with the queen zone, and without the queen zone, they are even better for white, I believe, because I think without the queens, the factor of the king safety becomes less important. And that means that the pressure along the f-file and the play on the king side is also less important, of lesser value, of lesser impact. And therefore, the more static positional factors, such as the pawn structure and the space on the queen side, they weigh more heavily as the king safety and the f-file counterplay factors become of lesser importance. So I think the endgame is only better for white than the middle game even. And yeah, I believe black is struggling with the plan here, and we might want to go knight b3, bishop d2, c4. I like this plan. Yeah, knight here, bishop here, c4. Just an interesting idea. We can focus here on the queen side, because without the queens there is no counterplay. In a position with queens, if you remember well, we brought the knight here to h2 to be extra secure, but here it's not necessary. Knight on f3 is doing just fine. Doesn't need any extra protection since there is no queens, no queen that black can use for attack. Rook e8, b4, and now queen e7 has been played by Mamedyarov as well. And bishop b3, bishop e6, bishop c2, I believe, is an interesting way of playing, just keeping the bishops. You can also trade them and hope to play the position, maybe slightly better, but I like playing more ambitious, keeping the bishops. d5, ed, knight d5. The queen on e7 is not well placed. Bishop b2, defending c3 pawn. Knight f4, yeah, the knight is very active on f4, so we do have to play well here a little bit. Knight e4 first. Threatening b5. If you go b5 right away, there are issues with ab queen c5. Nice little tactic. That's why knight e4 first, b5, preventing b5 from us, and bishop c1. We have to address the knight on f4. Send it back as soon as possible. Knight d5, now bishop d2. The bishop is now better placed here, controlling the f4 square. Let's say bishop b6, a good waiting move. Now you can take on b5, take on e8, knight g3, target the e5 pawn, and if queen d6, queen c1. I really like this flexible move. We are potentially eyeing the h6 pawn. Maybe we'll sack somewhere, maybe not. And bishop b1, c4, d4 are possible. In fact, sacking we probably will do after d4, ed, and then bishop h6. But again, if black protects from that somehow, let's say with maybe bishop d7, we can consider this bishop b1 and c4 ideas. In general, although we have less space, in the center we have more potential, more tactical ideas at our disposal. So we've got the c4 break, the d4 break, and we apply pressure on the e5 pawn, while black, although he has space, he stands there, he doesn't really have any tactical ideas going forward. And yeah, that is something that is important to understand. These structures where black goes d5 and then we take, they occur a lot in the Italian. 1197 is possible, having provoked before, but now we've got queen b3. The rook has to go back, and black argues that this move is not really useful for us, but it doesn't. Yeah, it's not worth 2 tempi going rook e8 and rook f8 back just to provoke it. And this has been played once by Yakovenko, but it's not very good. I believe after d4, Yakovenko took on d4. If knight g6, play a5, fixing the queenside structure. c6, and now bishop f1. Moving out of any d5 push, but also preparing bishop b2, c4. If bishop e6, we drop the queen back to c2. ed. cd is perfectly fine here, but I like to show another idea, just to give you a different, just to show you different possibilities that exist in these typical Italian positions. Knight takes d4, very interesting capture. Rook e8, and now bishop b2, bishop d7, and now c4. So another way of playing. We don't necessarily need a pawn on d4, although 17 c4 also very nice for white. But it's also quite instructive. We want to play knight 5 at some point, use this bishop, which is unopposed as the other bishop is on a completely different diagonal, not doing all too much. Knight g6, yeah, just a5, bishop f1. 13 ed4, cd4, d5 was Yakovenko's idea, but now a very strong play by white is required. We take on d5, 95 and 94. And we all played b5 here, but 94 is much more challenging. If 94, bishop d5, knight f6, bishop c4. If black goes c6, now we go b5. If ab, there's going to be an issue here on the a file. And otherwise, black is under quite some pressure here. This bishop is very strong on c4, c6 pawn potentially, and f7 pawn are weak. 95 is in the air, and black is not enjoying himself. Knight b6 back is possible. Bishop d3, bishop e6, very clever, trying to establish a bishop on d5. But it also has its downsides. As we have seen often with the pawn on d4, we have a lot of space for maneuvering, and our pieces are free. We can quickly set up initiative after queen d1, for example, bishop d5, knight f6, queen f6, knight e5 is very nice, rook e8, and b5. Always nice to remind black of this a6 pawn weakness, and ab, always uncomfortable with this x-ray along the a file. If 1894, bishop e4, and now bishop d5, you can just retreat bishop c2. Note the black pieces are on the queen side. We threaten queen d3. Black is not in time to defend and address his kingside issues. And if knight d5, move 19, then a very strong and a thematic idea, rook a3. I love these rook lifts. I've played my own fair share of them in the Italian. Always a thing to remember when the third rank is open. And now queen d6, knight e5 is very strong. Rook g3, bishop h6 is all threatened. f5 protects the king a bit, but really gives up control of the e5 square, so that's not good. And if c6 move 20, then bishop b1. Very strong retreat. Bishops work well on long distances. There is no need to have the bishop close to the targets. You can bring all the bishops back. Both bishops on b1 and c1 are facing the king side. And queen c2 is a nasty threat. I don't think black has a good way to deal with it. If knight b4, we crush with takes, bishop h6, gh, queen d2. Bad news for black. Knight on b4 is hanging, h6 pawn is hanging. After queen takes h6, knight e5 and rook g3 are also coming. Devastating attack here. So while again, so often in these structures, the pawn structure is good for black, but we do have a lot of active piece play, and we have to play actively in the center to justify our pawn structure. In fact, that's for rook e8, 97. Yeah, 10 bishop e6 is covered in a separate chapter. It's time to look at 10 knight h5. This is a very old setup, and I believe quite common among lower levels than the top level, where players are not as booked up, and they just know typical ideas and don't know that theory has evolved, and by now this is not a very good plan. Knight f1, queen f6, knight 1 h2. Bishop a6, by the way, can lead to the same thing after take before, to the same thing as the 10 bishop e6 variation. But we also have extra option like 12 bishop d5 or 12 b3. So this move order is just not very good. If you want bishop e6, move 10, do it here, not after knight h5. Queen f6, knight 1 h2. I played knight e3 against Wesley, but knight h2 is very similar. We're aiming for g4 in both cases, but on h2 the knight is slightly better positioned, as we will see against queen g6 system in particular. Knight f4 is the old way of playing. It's just not very good. We go knight g4, queen g6. We take on f4, e4, and we let this knight here stay. Go d4, shut this bishop down, and we allow black to win a pawn with bishop g4, ag, queen g4. And this is a really interesting position. Black is a pawn up, but it's not felt at all. He cannot make use of a fuse 4 against 2 here, while this bishop is uncomparable to our bishop on c4. And the case of the opposite colored bishops here is there are two big scenarios when it comes to opposite colored bishops. There is a scenario in which especially in the endgames, when king safety is not a factor at all, the opposite colored bishops make position more drawish, because in bishop endgames, without with opposite color bishops, you can block certain squares, and so the side with an extra pawn cannot push that pawn forward. So that's there, but as is well known as well, slightly lesser known than the first statement, but it's also well known, is that when the queens are on the board and attack could still be a factor, then opposite color bishops are actually helping the attacking side, because the defending side cannot protect this square complex. So the light squares in black's position are going to be suffering, and white just has strong initiative. For example, before knight e7 rook b1, we want to first push b5. We want to first get things going on the queen side before eventually hitting with e5. For example, rook a d8. Now b5, ab rook b5. In my game against So, I played it too slow a little bit. I think I played maybe queen. I think I played queen d3 first, and rook e2. It was just too slow. It's right away cutting to the point. Before rook b1, it's better. Rook a d8. That's also the setup of Wesley. But now go b5, ab. We can play ab, but I really like rook b5 here. Very uncomfortable for black to face. b6, protecting the b pawn, but now the bishop is very bad on a7, and we go e5, starting the action with black pieces misplaced. And after d5, bishop d3. Bishop is doing very well on this diagonal. c6, rook b2. Yeah, black is very uncoordinated. He cannot get his bishop into the game as the b6 pawn is hanging. And we always have that e6 idea ready. And things like bishop b1, queen d3 as well. And black is just struggling to find moves here. Despite being a pawn down, white has a tremendous position here. So this pawn sack very important against knight e4. Knight e4 is also the move you are likely to face. Let's be honest. But let's look at two other moves as well. 12 bishop e6. Here we can take on e6, of course, but much more principled is the move b3. Bishop c4, bc4 is great for us, reinforcing control of the d5 square. b1 is also there, opening the b file. And if black plays queen g6, rook a2, guarding the f2 pawn. I like that. And if knight f6, now we can take and play b4. And black has actually lost time, as he wants to send the knight back to h5. But yeah, this constant knight h5, knight f6 back is not really helping him when it comes to tempi count. So yeah, b3 basically b3 idea, and then take it before. It just gains us tempo because of this knight h5, knight f6 back. 12 queen g6 is the attempt of the engine to resurrect this old line, but it doesn't work very well. Modern computers show that g4 is very strong for white. And after knight f6, knight h4, yeah, the queen is sent to a very awkward square. Queen h7, b4. Yeah, this is a remarkable thing about the computers and the way they play chess, is they see the whole board, and while the issue clearly is the queen on h7, and you would think that you have to focus fully on the king side, somehow the engines still see the value and importance of space on the queen side as well. So I would just say let's trust them, but it is quite impressive. I mean, I'm sure if humans would play this, they would focus on only on the king side or only in the queen side. But yeah, this universal place is admirable. Bishop e6, bishop a2, very strong. We want to trade bishops on our terms here on a2, and if rook a8, bishop b1 is very nice. We don't have to trade. We avoided the trade, and the bishop is saying hello here to the h7 queen. Yeah, black isn't enjoying himself. The queen on h7 is very, very odd, and not clear to me what black is going to do. But again, if in terms of knight h5, I would mostly focus on knight f4, knight g4 at this position with the pawn sack. Yeah, it's an important position that I think is likely to occur in your games. I believe this is the end of our journey of the sidelines of the 6a6 system, followed by bishop a7. There is also the system with a6, a4, h6, where we play, let's say, rook e1, castle, knight d2, In fact, we go h3. Knight e2 is also possible, but we go h3 in our course, and then a5. So there is also a sort of an a6 line, but I covered that in a separate chapter. It's also a very big line. In this chapter, we covered sidelines after bishop a7, and that journey has come to an end. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.